You and we all have a massive problem in Warhammer 40,000. We want to play smart, we want to play savvy, but sometimes we just need to know what is going to do the most damage in the game. We have a need for trauma that we're going to inflict upon our opponents. So what I decided to do is build a list of units that and how much damage they can actually put into a singular target. And I wanted to find out what is the most damaging unit, and then which one's going to be the most effective one, of course. So these are not always necessarily the most practical units. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're relatively impractical, but it's something that we can do to get the most amount of damage out onto the battlefield. But there are a few rules with it. So when I made the list, and you're going to see it in just a moment, when I made the list, there are no combinations allowed. So if you require one unit to shoot first to get AP, extra AP, and then you need another unit to strip cover, and then you need another unit to give rerolls to wound, and then you shoot the fourth unit. That is not included. These are not combinations. These are solo units. I will use strats. I will use the detachment rule, but I'm not going to be utilizing unit combinations. Second off, outside of one special bonus one, which will be at the end, so make sure you stay tuned for that one, there are only going to be units that are going to be included that are within the range of like 400 to 500 points, and these are solo units. I didn't want to include like a Reaver Titans or a Porphyrion. Yes, I know how much damage they can potentially cause, but those are basically not in the game, so I'm not including them. But there is one special one at the end of the video for fun. It might be the Stompa. It might be. Anyway, then lastly, there's another rule. Because of the math that I was doing on it, it didn't really account for overspill, because quite honestly, I'm not particularly good enough at math to account for overspill. So I didn't really account for overspill, so the averages you're going to see are the averages damage dealt, and it can make some of the numbers look weird. I will clarify when it is necessary. So there is one honorable mention I'm going to give. The honorable mention doesn't make the list because it doesn't hit some of the categories, and I'm probably going to do another follow-up video, which is talking about like the most efficient damage use case, at which point this honorable mention will definitely be on there. So I present to you for the honorable mention, which is going to be Hellions. Hellions at 170 points. A 10-man unit of Hellions has like 50 attacks at strength 5, AP 1, damage 2. You can get them Lance. These dudes will deal 19.44 damage into a Big Knight for 170 points. It's actually a little bit ludicrous how much damage they can inflict based off of their point cost. So be on the lookout for these guys. But that was the warm-up. That's the baby stuff. That's the sub 400 point unit stuff. So we're going to talk about actual traumatizing damage units right now. 20 Zerkers with Karn. I fully recognize that you'll probably never see this unit because you're pretty much always going to be seeing that with a Juggerlord, because the Juggerlord allows them to move faster. The Juggerlord gives them the 3-inch engagement range. But if we want maximum damage output, we're going to go Karn. So I took Karn. He's giving the unit reroll 1s to hit, reroll 1s to wound. I am also going to give them sustained hits and lethal hits from their detachment rolls. So these guys, and I'm also counting them as charging. So they're getting their +2 strength. They're getting their +1 attack. This is the damage that we can come out with it. So basically, I calculated all the damage into both a Big Knight and into Terminators. So when we look at Karn, he's going to deal 10.73 damage. Yes, I know it can only actually be 9 damage or 12 damage because he's a 3 damage weapon, but because of the way that mathematics work, this is just what the average damage output is. So that's what I put down, and that's what we're counting. Then we have damage from the Chain Blades. The Chain Blades are going to be 21.06 damage into a Big Knight. That's strength 6. They're wounding on 5s. They're getting reroll 1s to hit, reroll 1s to wound, and they are also getting both lethal and sustained with their hits. And then we're going to get 11.23 damage from the Eviscerators for a grand total of 43 damage into a Big Knight, which is a lot of damage into a Big Knight. That's the equivalent of 1.82 Big Knights, which is maddening. This is so much trauma from this unit. This unit does cost 460 points, but it easily backhands a Big Knight, and if it spikes up a little bit, it could get into the realm of where it could technically get 2 Big Knights if it spikes up just a little bit in damage. So this is disgusting. Be on the lookout for how much damage this unit can cost. Now, I also calculated the damage into Terminators because that is another, like that elite infantry style build. Like, while we might not see Terminators, we see Blade Guard Vets, we'll see Death Rattle Terminators, we'll see people within that elite infantry style that can be hard to kill. So I wanted to calculate something besides just a Big Knight as well. And we went with the Humble Terminator. T5, 2-up armor save, 4-up invulnerable save, 3 wounds each. So when we run the math on this one, we're going to get 15.23 damage, or about 3.5 Terminators from the Eviscerators. We're going to see 21.6 damage from the chain blades, which will be 6.87 damage, or 6.87 Terminators. And then we're going to see 12.95 damage from Karn, which is going to be effectively 4.13 Terminators. And remember, this doesn't account for overspill. This is why the numbers can be a little bit odd. But you're going to get effectively kill 14.5 Terminators with Karn's unit on the charge, which is a monstrous amount of damage that they're putting out. So be aware, this unit absolutely has what it takes to slap. Now, the next unit is a little bit different. We're going to go at ranged. So we're going to see what we can do at a ranged solution. We're going to talk about one of the most hated units in the entire game right now, which is, of course, it's a pointy ear Eldar. We have Fuegan and 10 Fire Dragons with the Wave Serpent. Now, I did need to include the Wave Serpent into the cost simply because this unit has to be delivered. And the way that they operate is, yeah, they do the annoying ass thing. Gosh, the annoying thing where they hop out of the Wave Serpent, they do their shooting, then they fire and fade back into the Wave Serpent, making them relatively untouchable. So this unit combination is 465 points. Now, when we're shooting into the Terminators, Fuegan is going to deal 4.08 damage. This is using his sustained hits too. He counts as being in melter range. We got it. And he's going to be killing 1.36 Terminators. It's only strength 8, so you're wounding on 3s. They have a 4-bit vulnerable save, blah, 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 blah. Then the Exarch is going to deal 2.11 damage, or 0.32 damage from the Terminators. Then the Fire Dragons themselves are going to deal 15.17 damage. I did remember count all of these as being in melter range for a grand total of 2.33 Terminators. And then we have the Wave Serpent itself, which is going to put out about 3.51 damage when you include its Bright Lance and Shuriken Cannon, I believe it is, which is about a little over half a Terminator, for a grand total of 4.39 Terminators. Now, this math gets a little bit tricky to run with the Fire Dragons, simply because you have the ability to, like, flip a dice for a failed roll, but I calculate it as them being within melter range anyway, so they don't even need to bother flipping a dice because one shot kills everything. The problem here is that Terminators actually get wounded on 3s, not on 2s. That skews the math quite a bit. And then they have the 4-bit vulnerable save, which means about 50% of the things that do get through aren't going to be killing. So these guys are not particularly good at Terminators. Now, in a real life scenario where you are accounting where overspill really matters, perhaps you're going to end up with like 5 dead Terminators because they fail 1 extra save, blah blah blah, and maybe you flip 1 extra dice to a wound roll that otherwise you would have gotten. So maybe they do get 5, potentially even 6. But what you can see is they're not actually particularly good at Terminators. Now, it's a little bit of a different story here when we look at Big Knights. So remember, this is also a little bit tricky because with the flipping of the dice, calculating things gets really, really, really tricky. But Fuegan is going to deal on average 7 damage, right? It's D6 plus 6 for his Melta. So it's going to add up being about 7, because if they end up making the save on it, it is what it is. And that can change things, or if he ends up failing to wound, it can cause problems. Exarch is going to deal 4.74 damage, Fire Dragons are going to deal 20.74 damage, and a Wave Serpent 3.28 damage, for a grand total of 35.76 damage, which is 1.4 Knights. Now, where your Fire Dragons really get super, super scary is where you can use your 2 dice that you need to flip to enable a split fire. So, like, all those Fire Dragons can shoot a big knight, but then you can have just the Exarch also shoot into a Rhino right next to it and use your dice flips to also guarantee that the Rhino next to it also dies just by splitting one guy's shooting attack, right? That's where the Fire Dragons really start to shine. But in terms of raw damage output into a single target, it's not quite as much as you might expect. It's still extremely high, and it's still extremely devastating, especially when you account for the fact that now these Fire Dragons, they're just going to hop right back into that freaking Wave Serpent and do it again next turn. So Fuegan and the 10 and with the Wave Serpent is disgusting. Now into one of the most important and the coolest freaking guys. We got Gaz and the Big Mech plus 20 freaking boys. This is what I was really curious, and as far as I can tell, this is about the most damaging thing that we have. So it's for a 465 point combination. So you're gonna have Gazcool, you're gonna have a Big Mech, and you're gonna have 20 boys. Now, this counts as them being in the wall, so they get their +1 strength, +1 attack, and they're also going to get their crits on 5s and their lethal and their sustains because of the wall. Makari giving them all those benefits. So, just from the boys, the 19 boys, you're going to get 26.6 damage into a Big Knight, because now they're hitting on 2s, they're getting both lethals and sustains on 5s, and then they're +1 to wounds, so they're wounding on 5s at AP1. You're going to get 26.6 damage from only the boys, and then an additional 4 damage from the claw from the what they call it, knob, from the power claw with the knob. He's going to deal an extra 4 damage. So you're already over 30 damage with just the unit. And then we look at the 2 leaders. Gaz going into a big knight with his 7 attacks, hits on 2s, crits on 5s with both lethal and sustained. Wounding on 2s, AP3, damage 4. This guy is going to deal a monstrous 19.6 damage based off of the math, which, of course, is going to be either 16 damage or 20 damage in-game. And then from the Drilla, which is going to be the big knight, the big mech, this guy is going to get an additional 6.3 damage coming from the Drilla on average, which of course would just be 6 flat end game. So this is going to give us the equivalent of 2 big knights in one activation. If you can get this unit into 2 big knights, if you could somehow magically get both Gaz and the big mech into one of the big knights and then get all of the boys and the knob into the other big knight, you will kill 2 big knights in one activation. It is absolutely absurd how much trauma that is. Now, when we're going into Terminators, it changes a little bit. You're going to get 14.7 damage from Gaz, which is going to be effectively 4.5 Terminator models. You're going to get 4.72 damage from the big mech, which is going to give us approximately 1.5 Terminators. And then from the boys and the power claw, we're going to end up with 23.64 damage, which is going to give us effectively 7.5 models. That gives us a total of 12.5 Terminators. That is a crazy amount of Terminators. We're not beating Karn on the Terminators, so Karn's unit is still better on the Terminators, but we're also getting better into the big knights with the Gaz squad. Now, just because I love Gaz, because I'm a happy boy, I also wanted to see what happens if I just run him with knobs and not the boys, and I was actually really surprised by the results. So you might find this interesting as well, so stay tuned. So when we run just Gaz with 10 knobs, which is just a unit of pure power claws, it's a little bit cheaper. It's 445. You don't get the big mech on it, and it's a much harder to use unit. Like, I don't think you would ever run this unit because the big mech gives you all the benefits. It allows you to advance and charge or reroll your advances, move straight through models so you can't be move blocked, etc. But we're talking about raw damage output. So I wanted to see how much raw damage output is. When I go with just with the knobs, I get a total of 59.6 damage or 2.29 big knights. That's up from the 57 damage with this crew. And then instead of getting 12.5 Terminators like I would with the 20-man boy squad, I'm going to end up with 13.42 Terminators, which is absolutely brutal. So still don't beat Karn when it comes to the amount of Terminators killed. Karn getting 14.5 Terminators, but it is getting closer and it is getting an absurd amount of damage into the big knights for slightly cheaper, actually. All right, so let's look at a few more. So I wanted to see what the Sword Brethren in the new Black Templars get. So we're going to give them both the Marshal and the Castellan. So they're going to be re-rolling hit rolls, and they're getting crits on 5s. And we know that they have lethal hits on their power swords. And so so that's what we're going into, okay? So we've got Strength 5, AP2, Damage 2, full re-rolls to hit, crits on 5s with lethal. And they're +1 to wound because of the Black Templars vow, where they get +1 to wound when they're attacking something with equal or greater toughness than their strength. So basically, when we're going into Big Knights, this is a 400-point unit, mind you. We're going to get 23.33 damage from the power weapons. And then when we combine the Castellan and the Marshal, and yes, I did remember to include the Marshal's extra attack for having one enemy unit within 6 inches, we're going to get an additional 10.89 damage, leading to a really, really very respectable 34.22 damage, which is 1.31 Big Knights. Then when we do that spread into Terminators, it's a little bit lower than you might expect. They're actually not very good into Terminators. You're going to end up at only 8.44 Terminators, and this is including the extra attacks from the Marshal for having enemy models and stuff in range. Okay, so Max Sword Brethren with the leaders, it's a lot. They're doing a ton of damage, and they're going to have benefits of all the rest of the whatever detachment they're in. So if they're in Gladius, for example, they're going to get to advance and charge. So it's still a very versatile good unit, but you might still see them in their 5-mans just because they get a little bit more efficient going into different places. You don't necessarily need them in the biggest brick. Then lastly, well, not quite lastly, but there's one special. Don't forget the one at the end there. So I really thought this was going to be the best one. This was going to be the Death Shroud Terminators in Champions of Contagion, and I was really not particularly disappointed. So for 440 points, so less than Karn with the 20 Zerkers, you're going to have 6 Death Shroud Terminators, and you have Lord of Contagion. We're going to spend 3 CP on this combination because we're going to give them full rerolls to hit and wound, and we're going to give them crits on 5s. And since the Lord of Contagion gives them sustained hits and lance, And they already have access to lethal hits, being just Death Guard, seeing as that's like Death Guard's third army rule. It's not actually, but it feels like it. These guys are going to deal a monstrous 58.25 damage into big knights, which is going to give you effectively 2.23 big knights destroyed for 440 points. Unbelievably disgusting. We run this into Terminators, and we're going to end up at approximately 11.93 Terminators as well. Holy crap. Can I say it again? These Death Shroud are unbelievable. So when I go through all of it, for 440 points and the ability, like we're just talking about raw damage output specifically, it looks to me like this is probably the best. Actually, I think when we do raw damage output, I think Gaz with 10 knobs is actually the best because we're going to get slightly more damage into the big knight, 59.6 instead of the 58 point whatever. And we get 2 extra Terminators over, well, almost 2 extra Terminators over the Death Shroud. Karn has the best damage into Terminators itself. Karn with 20 Berserkers gets the best damage into Terminators, but he kind of lags behind on Big Knights. He's only killing almost 2 Big Knights. So I think effectively we're going to give the most amount of damage out to Gaz plus 10 knobs, specifically when we're talking about in the wall. So you get the lethals and the sustains and the crits on 5s. It's 40 freaking strength 10 power fists with +1 to wound and +1 to hit. It is an absolutely absurd amount of damage. Now, I promised you there was a special super secret sauce here at the end, and I'm delivering. Here is the Stompa. Not that the Stompa meets any of the criteria for this list, but because he's awesome and I wanted to see what he actually does, I'm putting the Stompa down. This bad boy costs a monstrous 800 points, and I am giving him 1 CP for whatever you call it. The thing that lets him crits on 5s. And because of that, we're going to get a monstrous amount of damage. We're going to get 23.75 damage into Terminator bodies because he's got like an 18 attack, or goes to, I think, 19 in the WA sweep attack profile with strength 10, AP2, damage 3. Now with sustained on 5s, it's disgusting. So you're going to kill 8 Terminators, 7.92. Call it 8 Terminators. And then with a strike damage, you're going to deal all the way up to 58 damage into a big knight because his AP5 just goes straight through any armor save. You don't get and we're talking about big knights that do not have invuln. So we're not talking about the Atropos. We're talking about something like the Knight Crusader or even the Knight Despoilers for a total of 58 damage. Although it could actually only be 50 or 60, like you guys get it. So guys, this was max damage output. The winner was Mr. Gazgul with 10 knobs. If I had to use it, I would basically always run it with boys, though, because it's just so much more easy to deliver. These units were not designed for their practicality. These units were designed for the damage output. I'm sure there are some damage combos that I missed out there that might be able to approach these guys. The big thing I was surprised by was actually the Sword Brethren. I thought the Sword Brethren would be more damage. What were you guys surprised by? And if there's something that you think does better than Gaz, put it in the comments down below. I want to know. So with that, I'm going to take off for today. Blessings and happy cropping. Bye-bye.